Afternoon and welcome to the first Redevelopment Agency meeting of 2018. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Again, this is the first Redevelopment Agency meeting of 2018, and I, Derek Kitchen, have served as the vice chair of the RDA for the past 2 years under former council member, board member Lisa Adams, who's no longer with us. So I will conduct the meeting to begin with today. We are at our first item, item A, general comments to the board. If anybody here wishes to speak, we have comment cards floating around, so go ahead and fill one of them out. And a staff member will be here to grab that for you. I currently have one card in front of me, and that is for George Chapman. George, come on up, please.
Okay, I have to repeat myself because it's really important. We have a couple of new city council members, and I'm hoping that they will kick something loose because RDA has almost $100 million worth of property, some of it vacant for 10 years. And we also have a problem with the homeless problem. The homeless deserve better. They have no place to put their pets. They have no place to put storage. There's no storage. And I know Laura's working on it, and it's a problem. But you, as the RDA, can kick something loose and spend a little bit of money, very little money, to get these people off the street. They shouldn't be walking around with shopping carts. It makes our area, our city, look really, really bad, and it's disrespectful. It's a sad commentary on our city, but you can do something about it. I'm asking you to. So I'm asking you to, one, find a place to expand storage, not just 8 hours a day, but 24 hours a day, so they can work. Those who are homeless who want to work can't. They don't have any place to put their stuff. Now, some of you have heard this again and again and again, but you have a chance now to do this. This is really important. You also have a chance to find a facility or an outdoor area for them to stay so they don't camp out all over around our city. They deserve more respect. They deserve to be listened to, and that's what they want. They want a place to stay that they feel comfortable in, that they can call their own. And yeah, I'm sorry, it takes you giving them something to be human. So I'm asking you again for that. Now I have a question, since the next item is public comment on RDA Northwest Quadrant. Can I speak on that now? Or do you want me to go back and come back?
The next item is our public hearing for that, so why don't you speak to us about your concern about sidewalks instead?
Oh, I'll do it all. Okay.
Okay.
When you're doing development, my concern is Salt Lake City has a complete streets ordinance. And a complete streets ordinance says pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles. We do not enforce or have a system for that, and that's a problem. So, for
that's
instance,
your 2 minutes.
because
That's your 2 minutes.
Pardon?
I apologize. That's your 2-minute mark.
Okay, so we can talk about that later.
Okay. And if you want to stick around, I don't see any other cards for our general comment period, so we'll just go into item B, which is our
Public comments
hearing
for
for
Northwest
the
Quadrant.
proposed community reinvestment area plan for the Northwest Quadrant. And I have your card first, followed by David Ward. And to the audience, if you'd like to speak to this item, please pick up a blue comment card and a staff member will grab that for you. So go ahead, Mr. Chapman.
Okay. I'm disappointed in the Northwest Quadrant plan for RDA. You do not have a passenger rail line put in, and it can be paid for with your tax increment dollars that you're getting from the property. You need this is a destination. You have 25,000 employees at International Center. You're going to have tens of thousands of employees more in the Northwest Quadrant. This is a destination. Destinations make rail systems successful. So I don't understand why you aren't pushing for Green Line extension to at least 5600 West. And I need to remind you that in Seattle, Amazon helps pay for their rail line. Amazon does pay for it, and they're going to 5600 West. So I don't understand why you don't put in a rail line. This is your best chance to get and pay for rail line. The airport board is already talking about it, and I don't know why you're not. So you should be talking about this. The airport board is talking about every other line, every other track train going to 5600 West. They'd like that. It makes sense. You have 1,100 passengers a day going to airport. That's not enough. But you could have thousands more if you went to 5600 West. The other thing is on the Northwest Quadrant, you only have a minimal amount of hotels for tens of thousands of employees. And that doesn't make sense either. So I'm asking you for more hotels in the Northwest Quadrant to supply all these new businesses that will rely on the airport and business from the airport. And it'd be nice to have a little bit of flexibility for development in Northwest Quadrant. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Up next, I have David Ward. And if anybody else would like to speak to this matter, fill out a blue card, please, and a staff member will grab that from you.
Thank you, and thank you, board members. My name is David Ward. I'm a partner with the Boyer Company based here in Salt Lake City. I am here to follow up on a letter submittal that we've provided to the Community and Economic Development Department regarding the project area boundaries for the CRA. In particular, there is one parcel that we currently have under contract that at the time that we executed a purchase contract for this parcel was in the Northwest Quadrant Overlay District as we understood it at the time. During the December 8th distribution of the CRA plan, we noticed that the project area boundary for some reason had omitted this parcel that we have under contract, although our neighbors just down the road are included in the project area. Our concern with being omitted from the CRA area is that our parcel, like all parcels in that area, including where Project Husky is currently being developed, will require a significant amount of infrastructure upgrade in order to develop those parcels for commercial uses. Under the current scenario with the boundaries established as they are, other parcels would receive some tax increment support to help pay for those infrastructure upgrades that I think everybody is aware that are required in those areas where the parcel that we have right now would be omitted and we would end up having to fund those improvements on our own. So we ask that the board and the staff review the project area boundaries in the interest of fairness between us and our neighbors, and to see if it's possible for the parcel that we've identified to be incorporated into the project area boundary.
Thank you so much for your comments today, Mr. Ward.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
may I ask one clarifying question for that?
Yes, please.
All right. Do we know where your parcels are located?
Yes.
Yes, I have a map. If
You have a
you'd like
map
to
there
see.
we passed out? Okay,
The map was emailed out and I believe should be in your folders
Okay. Thank you.
that indicates there. Oh, it's not.
And Board Member Johnston, I have a map that shows the property in particular that he's referring to, as well as his neighbor that are carved out. So we can talk about that in a moment when we have this line item. Up next, I have John Birkinshaw, followed by Lance Bowen? Bowen, excuse me.
Thank you, board members, for the opportunity. I'm John Birkinshaw with Rio Tinto. We're one of the major landowners out there, and I'd like to take the opportunity just to provide a general statement about our feelings with the Northwest Quadrant. The Northwest Quadrant is an opportunity of the grandest scale we could ever imagine for our community at large. This is one that is going to require a lot of coordination and a lot of collaboration. It's one that municipal boundaries isn't really going to drive. It's one that we're going to have to reach across the aisles and we're going to have to work together. We see the need for a very stable environment to work with Salt Lake City, and we're really strong advocates for Salt Lake City leading this effort. But at the same time, we're also going to have to work with the county, the school district, the state. And we want to deliver the message that this is an opportunity for all of us to come together. This is something that is remarkable, something that we really need to intensely think about how we're going to execute this plan. And you know, the ultimate prize is something that will be very unique to this nation. We have such an incredible strategic location here in the Intermountain West with our connections to the seaport. And it's not all about just simply our CRA that we're talking about today. This is a much broader opportunity that we need to be able to put the spokes together in the hub and pull it all together. So that's, I mean, it's a general statement. We're big advocates.
Can you speak right into the microphone, please?
I'm sorry. Do you want me to start up or no? We're big advocates. We think it has to be a group effort. It's one that the cost of development is absurd. It's one that it's going to take a lot of investment to bring us to the level that we are going to become a location of choice for business. And so we want to make sure that we're all kind of, you know, marching to the same drum here. And you know, we're both landowners. I think I can speak for Lance back here. We're both very excited about working with the city, the RDA, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Up next, Lance Bowen, and that is the final card that I have for this topic.
My name is Lance Bowen. I'm CEO and president of Colmena Group. I represent the Northwest Quadrant Epperson property, which is approximately 1,500 acres adjacent to the property that John represents. And just on behalf of the partnership and kind of reiterating what John has spoken about, I just want to say how excited we are about the opportunity we've had to work with the city, with the staff, with the attorneys and the council, and to be able to voice to you the magnitude of what we think this project area really is and the impact that it can have, you know, in the state of Utah, especially in the city of Salt Lake. We're never going to see 3,000 acres of land in the city of Salt Lake come into fruition again in our lifetime. This is kind of it. And so I have taken this opportunity very seriously and really given this a lot of thought, and I'm excited about the ability we have to work with you guys. And we also care about the overall environment here. This is something that says a lot about our city. Embracing rail as a mode of transit is a really important attribute and an aspect that will cost money on the front end, but long term, the payback in rail in terms of what it does to the environment is such a better way to move this commerce. We should not be trucking everything across our country. We should be using rail and franchising rail as much as possible, and expansion in rail, and to believe in that, for you to see the opportunity that rail can do to this city. I say this statistic a lot. You can move a ton of freight 400 miles on a gallon of diesel with rail. You can move that same ton of freight 13 miles with a truck. So which is friendlier for the environment? It's nearly 30 times more friendly to use rail as your major infrastructure and logistics platform. So I just want to reiterate how this is a partnership. It's going to require the city and a working relationship with the state and all these other constituents long term. And so we're excited about this working relationship, and we want to spend many years of our life working on this with the city and moving forward in a positive fashion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to this matter in the audience? In that case, I will look for a motion from my colleagues for this public hearing.
I'll move we close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Mendenhall and a second by Board Member Johnston. Let's see, is there any discussion on this item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. We close the public hearing, and now we are on to item number C, or letter C, excuse me. Redevelopment agency business. This is the election of our chair and vice chair for calendar year 2018. I think we have ballots. We're going to conduct this election like we did the city council chair and vice chair election last week.
Mr. Chair, can I make a nomination?
By all means.
I'd like to nominate you to be our chair, and you've been apprenticing under Lisa Adams for 2 years, and you have a a good deal of passion and interest in RDA project areas, and I appreciate the willingness that you bring to continue in that leadership role for the RDA. So I hope that you be our chair.
Thank you, Board Member Mendenhall. Anybody else? Well, I would like to speak to that, and I appreciate the nomination, Aaron. I appreciate that as a friend and as a colleague. Over the last 2 years, the board of the Redevelopment Agency has done a lot with our staff partners in the administration. We have seen some significant changes within the structure of the Redevelopment Agency, both at a staffing level, organizationally within the Department of Economic Development, and I think most significantly with the budget and the way that we go about budgeting our redevelopment project areas. We've done some really amazing work, whether it was the participation of the RDA in the site acquisition for homeless resource centers. In October 2016, we set aside $21 million of affordable housing money, including $4.5 million for affordable housing in areas of opportunity, which you really let out on that, Board Member Mendenhall. And we laid the groundwork for what will become enormous opportunity for the board over the next 2 years. We're looking at the Northwest Quadrant. We've heard from some community members about the opportunity that exists out there. And we are in the process of finalizing 2 new neighborhood project areas with State Street and the 9-Line project areas. And so as we move forward, I hope the Redevelopment Agency can flex its muscle a bit when it comes to neighborhood and community-based economic development. I think that we have shown in the past that the Redevelopment Agency can focus on housing and equity at the same time, as well as granular economic growth. And so I'm really looking forward to participating within the board over the next couple of years to drive reinvestment and to lift neighborhoods even more, and use the Redevelopment Agency as one of the greatest promoters for economic development in our city. So I really appreciate the nomination. All right, let's vote.
And as a reminder, please list your name so that we can comply with the Open Meetings Act. Right, that would be preferred. Andrew Johnston voted for Derek Kitchen. Chris Wharton voted for Derek Kitchen. Aaron Mendenhall voted for Derek Kitchen. Derek Kitchen voted for Derek Kitchen. James Rogers voted for Derek Kitchen. And Amy Fowler voted for Derek Kitchen. Congratulations, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to note that Board Member Luke is not here today. All right. Thank you.
Vice
Appreciate
Chair.
it. Now we move on to the election of our Redevelopment Agency Vice Chair. And we'll go through the same motions. And if there's a nomination from this body, I would look for that now.
Mr. Chair, hi.
Hi.
I'd like to nominate Amy Fowler for the position of Vice Chair of the RDA Board for 2018 year.
Great. Amy, would you like to speak to that?
Many of you were sitting in here when I turned over to Councilmember Rogers, and I said, does that feeling in the pit of your stomach ever go away that like you might screw something up when you're up here? And he said, no, it doesn't. So we might as well jump into other things and seek or hope to get a leadership position. In all reality, I'm really, really excited for this, and thank you for the nomination. As we were transitioning, and I haven't had a chance to say this, so for the people in the room, the month before our swearing in, or the month and a half before our swearing in, was amazing because the people in this building were so helpful and generous and kind and taught us a lot. I'm speaking for both Chris and I, by the way. And one of the areas that I really just started to feel passionate about was RDA. Meeting with Laura Fritz and Danny was really exciting, and I'm all of these projects, and I was staying up late reading all of this stuff, and so I'm really looking forward to all of the opportunities that we have right now, and to hopefully being a part of those opportunities. As mentioned, I think there's a lot going on and a lot that this city has to offer, and we are well on our way of becoming one of the best cities in the nation by far, and with having a lot of different opportunities for people. And one of my goals as a city council person is to ensure that people across the board have access to opportunities. And I think being a part of the RDA in this way is one of those ways to ensure that. So thank you for the nomination.
Great. All right. If you haven't, go ahead and fill out your ballot and pass them this way, please. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Andrew Johnston voted for Amy Fowler, Chris Wharton for Amy Fowler, Aaron Mendenhall for Amy Fowler, Derek Kitchen for Amy Fowler, James Rogers for Amy Fowler, and Amy for Amy Fowler. Great. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Okay, now we are on to section C2, the approval of minutes from December 5th, 2017. Do I have a motion, or is there any conversation that you'd like to have about this?
I'll move approval.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Mendenhall, a second by Board Member Rogers. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that carries. Now we are on to item C3, Northwest Quadrant Project Area, discussion and consider approval of Community Reinvestment Area Plan, as well as the interlocal agreement. Now I'd like to just say that this Community Reinvestment Area outlines the development and framework and environmental and economic development standards for the Northwest Quadrant. Just by way of reminder, in 2016, the summer of 2016, this body adopted the master plan for the Northwest Quadrant. And just last fall, we completed a good chunk of our zoning changes to that area, with more to be coming down the pipeline here shortly. And now we consider the adoption of the CRA itself, as well as the interlocal agreement with our fellow taxing partners. And so I will look to, I believe it's Danny Waltz, Tammy Hunsaker, and Jennifer Bruno to participate in the briefing for this body. I think Jennifer's going to stay back here and play director.
I don't blame her.
Oh, Ben Ludke, excuse me. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Sorry.
You're good.
I plan on talking a lot. Let me first start by saying congratulations to new board members Fowler and Wharton. Not sure you could have picked a more exciting RDA meeting to start with, so hopefully this is not the norm as we settle in. It is my honor to sit here before you today at this RDA meeting. Some might say I drew the short straw to be the one to speak to you this today. But what you have before you in terms of the agreements and the plan within your packet for consideration is the culmination of a lot of work across the entire administration, as well as collaboration with the City Council staff. On behalf of the RDA and more importantly the Economic Development Department, this represents a lot of work that we've done over the past several months, as well as probably the better part of a year and a half and beyond. When Tammy Hunsaker looks back on this part of her life, she will probably title this chapter the Northwest Quadrant because of the amount of work she's done. And I would like to say special thanks also to Katie Lewis in the Attorney's Office, as well as Marshall White as part of the administration. But really I'd like to say thank you to the entire city that this plan and the agreements before you and all of the information that is going into this process has essentially touched almost every department within the city. And it's a culmination of all of their efforts that we are able to sit here before you today. I'd like to say thank you to the developers for working with us through this process, all of the consultants that we have asked to participate, and I'd like to say special thanks to council staff who, when we started meeting with them on the magnitude of the request that we were going to bring forth, they were immediately understanding, extremely cooperative and collaborative as we have worked through this. And we would not be here right now without them. So thank you very much. This is not your typical time frame for how we would do this. This is extremely condensed. I would not want to say it's rushed, but it's extremely efficient. We are mindful of what we're asking. We are mindful of the fact that what you have before you is essentially just the foundation. And as we speak to this and as we answer your questions, you're going to hear us say that what you have before you right now is just the beginning of this process, that we're going to continue to be doing a lot of work, both in terms of the city as well as with the developers. And we are even just now barely beginning the process of having something that we can then reach out to the rest of our taxing entity partners and start that side of the process as well. So I would not want to say that this is preliminary as much as this is just the beginning. And as we get through this, you're going to start and continue to see a lot more information come your way in the forms of zoning and the development agreements and the reimbursement and everything with the RDA. These plans and agreements that we have presented for your consideration, we are spanning across both the RDA meetings and consideration of the RDA board as well as the city council in those meetings. And so many of these issues will return to you, not only in the capacity of the RDA board, but also in the city council as we get that information. And you will continue to have approval of these plans and agreements as that information comes forth. So having said that, new chairperson Kitchen, I would defer to your guidance on how you would like us to proceed. I am happy to speak through the outline within the memo of the items for your consideration and speak to those and describe each of those in terms of how they relate. In the larger picture, Tammy has done an enormous amount of work of building that framework and that structure in a way that we hope is as easy to understand as possible. But I would defer to you and how you would like us to present this information for you.
Well, I think it would be helpful, considering we have an audience full of stakeholders and a couple new board members. It probably would be helpful if you could walk through some of these issues that were proposed in the staff report.
Sure.
And I know that there will be some questions tossed your way as well. In particular, if you could speak to the importance of the RDA's role in developing the Northwest Quadrant, and if I just think that it's a critical component here that this may not develop for a couple decades if it were not for the RDA. So if you could speak to some of the importance of that as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
may I request also that if it works into your, what you're telling us, that you could address the 3 policy questions that are brought up in our packet on page 4?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, I will, I'll try to give the broad outline, and I will give Tammy permission to nudge me along the way to throw in items that I'm forgetting. The reason this is before you today as action of the RDA is as part of developing the framework and the foundation for developing the Northwest Quadrant, one of the biggest tools the city has available to them is obviously the creation of a community reinvestment area through the RDA. And that is one of the preliminary steps you have, because from this not only comes all of the agreements by which the city would ultimately enter into agreements with the developers themselves for the development out there, but the basis for the rationale for creating the project area, a lot of that comes from information in terms of the cost-benefit analysis and the economics and the justification for utilizing tax increment that plays a big part into how development is going to occur out there. So speaking to that behalf, the project area was defined, as you indicated, in June of 2016 in terms of the original survey. And what that essentially— July. Thank you, Tammy. See, that's why I nudged. And as part of that, that opens the door to doing the initial cost-benefit analysis, and that has kind of started the process for all city departments to look at this area. You're familiar with the area. You understand that it currently does not have any infrastructure. It has considerable site conditions in terms of the groundwater and soil, and is somewhat was prompted by the decision by the state to build the correctional facility out there. And so that was the opportunity for the city to start looking at it.
Can I jump in just
Sure,
really
please.
quick? You mentioned the original survey in July of 2016. To answer some of the questions we received from the stakeholders in the audience, were these properties included in that initial survey? Because we've seen a couple maps floating around that indicated they might have been, but we're not entirely sure. So can you speak to that, Tammy or Danny?
Sure. The properties were not included in the original RDA survey area for the project area creation. However, they are included in the city's master plan and overlay of the Northwest Quadrant and the zoning. And so that's where I think there's a little confusion in terms of where they were at in the process. So to that extent, while they were part of the original master plan and the overlay, they were not called out within the original RDA survey and were not part of any process at that point through the RDA. And we can circle back to that in terms of ideas for what we could do to speak to that request.
Yeah, we can get to that at the end.
So as part of creating the RDA project area, that the basis for doing that is the plan creation. And then obviously the authorization for the RDA to receive tax increment comes through the individual interlocal agreements with the various taxing entities. And typically the way this is processed is that the city, through the RDA and the city council, approve the plan. And then that plan is what we then take to the other taxing entities and start discussing with them and requesting their participation and involvement in what would ultimately and hopefully be an interlocal agreement with each of those taxing entities. At this time, the only interlocal being proposed is within the RDA and the city. And so when the city and the RDA approve this plan, we will then use that to go out and initiate those conversations with the other taxing entities and see how that takes shape in terms of what those interlocal agreements would be with each of them.
Mr. Chair, if I could jump in for just a second. I think just since you're covering it, this gets to the point that's made a little bit in policy question number 2 on page 4, which is that the budget that's proposed in the CRA plan reflects all taxing entities participating.
Yes.
So to the extent that either they don't participate or they participate at a lower level, that budget will be smaller. So just so
Yeah, and I
we all
think
know.
thank you, because that's an excellent point to bring up, is that the plan at this point does anticipate and it projects that involvement that we seek to get from all of the taxing entities in terms of the projected tax increment and how it relates to the budget. However, the final budget, the final participation of the taxing entities, and ultimately the final amount of what the increment is that the agency will get comes through the approval of those interlocal agreements. And so that can change, and very often it does change from what the original CRA plan is to what the ultimate and final budget is for the project area based on those final negotiations. So, thank you.
Board Member Mendenhall?
Will you continue and tell us, which is part of that second point there, about how the RDA will make that clear to developers that everything in here is really contingent upon an assumed budget that is not decided entirely by the city?
And so the way that we've done that, I mean, number one, that's typically inherent just within the project area creation, that it doesn't entitle them or vest them in anything. But what we've done in terms of our individual negotiations of the development agreements with the majority property owners, it specifically states, number one, that the amount of increment the agency can pass on to the developers is only what we get out of those final interlocal agreements and participation by the taxing entities. So they are not vested or entitled to anything more than what we get. And number two, we also state within the agreement very clearly that that is a limited obligation that is tied just to the increment that is thrown off by the project area and what the agency gets. And so,
For future public benefit analyses, I think that these conversations may have happened without me already leading up to today's meeting, but there was the assumption by Jones Lang LaSalle in their public benefits analysis that we would be contributing 75% and not other contribution scenarios. So that, leads us into a binding conversation, really, as the decision-making body to have fewer decisions with our partners when we are looking at development agreements and putting together this CRA. So I'm not wanting to pull that apart in this meeting today or in this development, in this CRA. But for future public benefit analyses, I do not want our contractors assuming a contribution amount for both our sake and for the developer's sake or the property owners in that area, that we need to be more clear about the legislative authority, the options that the board actually has. Thanks.
I think that's an extremely good point in terms of the public benefit analysis, to make sure our language in there implies that that is not a set in stone or a foregone conclusion. So I think that's a good addition. So any other thing I can answer on that before moving on? Okay. So in terms of setting up the project area and the interlocal and the budgets with the individual taxing entities, once that is authorized and the agency is able to receive the increment, what would be the next logical step in that is actually where we're at right now as well, in terms of having the ability to reach out to the property owners and developers in terms of both a development agreement, either between the city and the developer, and or a reimbursement and participation agreement with the individual property owners and developers as projects come online. And so the framework starts with the project area and essentially authorizing the collection of increment, and then from there it trickles down to what the actual reimbursement and development agreements are. I should also touch on the fact that as part of the decision to create the project area, the council considers, obviously, one of the big pieces is the cost-benefit analysis that is prepared, that we have included within the plan. And this is also something that is going to be further refined as we continue to collect information on the costs, as well as we look at the different scenarios for tax increment generation, and how that will ultimately be related and included within the interlocal agreements with the different taxing entities. So that is one thing we know right now that is going to continue to need to be reviewed, and as more information comes in, we will refine those costs and likely be adjusting the budget accordingly. So,
That, Mr. Chair,
please,
may I-
go ahead.
that kind of touches on policy question one. You want to dig in?
I'm just lining these up, right?
Well,
Just teeing them up. So in terms of,
Back.
the policy question of how the projected costs and the projected revenue of tax increment generation, at this point, we're kind of looking at those both together, and we recognize right now very easily that the projected tax increment probably falls way short of what the anticipated costs of development are going to be out in the Northwest Quadrant. In terms of reviewing the development agreement, you will probably see that that is one of the reasons why we set this up to where the available financing tools in order to pay for those costs are likely going to be a combination of impact fees, pioneering agreements from the developers, as well as tax increment.
Will you get a little more clear on whether or not that falling short probability is for the backbone system, or does it seem sufficient for the backbone system and it's falling short on the branches?
That's an excellent question, and we hope to be able to address that. And so we will prioritize, obviously, as on behalf of the city, and I may be speaking for other departments here, but our priority obviously will be the backbone. And if there is a burden that falls on the property owners and development, that'll be more the branches that are more individual to their properties. But we will focus more on the backbone and providing the basic level of infrastructure out there. And then beyond that, we will see to what extent we can also offer assistance to the developers for the portions that are the smaller legs of that, even to the point that it takes it all the way to their building.
Do you have preliminary cost estimates?
We do not. I mean, we are working on them, but we do not have any preliminary costs at this point that I think we would be comfortable sharing within a public setting in terms of the broad scope of everything we're looking at.
Where at in the process would we anticipate that?
So we would anticipate, we would not have those final numbers as part of the final interlocal agreements with the entities. We anticipate having, some of those numbers won't come in until they're actually pulling permits. Okay. And that's why we're laying the foundation by which that they can come and have those conversations with the city, depending on where they're at in the process. Obviously, the backbone infrastructure is something that we would probably be able to identify much sooner in the process, because that will be tied more towards the larger, infrastructure. But you're going to potentially have some of those questions that aren't addressed until they're actually ready to build a building, and they know either what the capacity is or what the extent of the burden cost is for bringing utilities right up to their building. So as far as the city's concerned, we hope to have that Obviously, at some level that we can make determinations for the impact fee study. The developers obviously want to have that to a level that they can start discussing about getting property ready for marketing and developing, so that would be a conversation that could also include pioneering agreements. And then as far as the RDA goes, that will be information that we will have at least at the point that we're entering into the individual reimbursement agreements with the developers. So it's a multi-stage approach to,
Right.
to gathering information.
Even the Public Utilities is working on the master drainage plan, which I believe they're anticipating a draft will be done in later this month or maybe next month. So that's looking at drainage channels and also fill requirements. So a lot of numbers and development costs will come out of that. The impact fee facilities plan. So there's all these working parts that are currently going on.
So that impact fee facilities plan, you're referring to the one in particular for Northwest Quadrant, is that right?
Right. They're updating the plan, and I know Mike Reberg is here and could speak better to this issue, but I think they're looking at updating the plan right now and trying to determine whether the Northwest Quadrant will be its own service area or whether it will be citywide.
So that is our third policy question, so we may want to have Mr. Reber come up and speak to that at the moment.
Away. and as Mike's coming, I think the other piece to keep in mind is some of these answers we just don't have yet. Oh, oops. As I knock over my water. Some of these we just don't have yet because we just haven't made the decision per se as to what is the best stormwater solution or detention solution. And so, thank you, sorry. As we gather that information, we'll be able to present those different options and understand the cost better.
And we are working with the developers closely. There's concepts of heavy haul road.
Okay, thank you, Director Reberg. I'll hand it back over to you,
Okay.
Danny.
Well, we've done a good job of teeing up all the policy questions. So just in summary, what you have before you for consideration, both from the RDA board and the city council side, is the approval and adoption of the CRA plan. As part of that, you also have the approval of the interlocal agreement, essentially between the agency and the city, authorizing the tax increment from the city to the redevelopment agency. And then you have two development agreements with two of the majority property owners out there that would also involve approval and adoption by the RDA and the city council. For tonight's RDA meeting, you have obviously the hearing that we've already done for this plan, as well as consideration and adoption of the plan itself. And then you have consideration for adoption of the interlocal agreement with the city. And then for the city council meeting this evening, you have the public hearing for the development agreement as well as the adoption of the plan. And then you have the potential to consider action this evening for the plan, and you have the potential to consider action this evening for the interlocal agreement. Or you have the possibility of deferring action of that until next week, which is also going to be a double header of the RDA and city council, where city council will then consider anything that they defer from this evening, as well as consider adoption or approval of each of the development agreements with the two property owners. And then you will follow that up with an RDA meeting, which would be the final piece of the RDA approving the development agreements with each of the property owners. So we have quite a bit of action, and we are happy to answer and address any questions that you would have on the process or the schedule or any of the items themselves.
Board members, do you have any questions for Danny while he's here and Tammy on the CRA? Board Member Johnston?
So again, just some clarifying questions for people who ask me these questions
Yes.
about the boundaries themselves. So I know the Boyer Company asked earlier about a subject property, which I'm still a little confused about if this is accurate or not. But the second piece is why only include anything north of I-80 versus anything south as part? When we talk about the Northwest Quadrant is defined differently by a lot of different folks. Sometimes it's the entire west side industrial area, north and south of I-80. Sometimes it's just the undeveloped area of the prison sort of locations out there.
Right.
Give us a sense of why the boundaries sort of fell where they were.
This one I'm definitely going to defer to Tammy on because she's got more of the historical knowledge.
Well, originally, this wasn't actually my project when the original boundaries were set up. It was Ed Butterfield's, but from my understanding, the focus really wanted to be on the undevelopable area where there's currently a lack of infrastructure. So that's why we did not go south of I-80. And the 5,600 west line where the boundary currently is was determined just because we didn't want to go into the International Center where development already occurred. So it just looked like a natural cutoff at 5600 West and 700 North for that corner there. The project area is quite large as it is. I think it's 74 or 800 acres. I can't quite remember, but keep in mind half of that is within the undevelopable area. We had to include that within the project area boundaries just because we can't split parcels. But that being said, there's 3,000-ish acres of land in this area, so it's a matter of, it's already large. I don't know. I guess that's a policy consideration going south of I-80, but it's a quite a large undertaking as is with the infrastructure needs that will need to be implemented in the Northwest Quadrant. So,
Board Member Johnston, just to help orient you to this map, the one with green, you see the red box there. Those are the two properties that community members spoke to us about at first. And so the red line on the far left side is 5600 West. And so everything up and down from there is carved out. I'm sorry, everything to the right is all carved out. So
The subject property, this is the Boyer property in the red?
that is not included in.
Not included.
That is
even
not
though in
included.
this map, it looks like it is included.
Right.
This map, I think, illustrates the challenge of having different maps for zoning actions and overlay actions versus the CRA. So if you look at this other map, this is actually the map for the CRA. This was the map for the overlay district, which is essentially is a planning action, not a redevelopment action. So the CRA map doesn't exactly mirror the zoning overlay map.
So why is that piece carved out in the CRA mapped versus the overlay map?
The decision at the time was simply, you have to draw the line somewhere, and so that line was drawn at 56 West, and unfortunately that meant these properties were not included. And if you'd like, I can speak to the process a little bit in terms of options for consideration.
So let me just say how I would like to move forward. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the process, but I'd also like to, I imagine, hear from our legal team as far as what we can and can't do, just so that it's on the record. And then we'll take action from there.
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
And then I have a question from Board Member Mendenhall.
Well, I think I would like to say, before we get to actions, that there have been a lot of maps. We've had a master plan, M1 rezone, the CRA development agreements. There have been a lot of maps, and it was my understanding as we went through the M1 rezone process that the CRA would be including developable but undeveloped properties north of I-80 and west of the airport. And I know that there's, then we get into a limited amount of development opportunity in the overlay areas, but this one seems like it fell out of our intention, that we intended to address these properties, but in trying to draw nice lines, that they were left out. So in looking at the green map, as we're calling it, there seems to be a parcel just east of the subject properties that's still in the coloring of the development area. And I'm curious about that single parcel that's hanging out there.
I think that's airport owned.
The blue and yellow one?
Yeah. I think what you're talking about on the Exhibit A map, right? Just
Yes,
east,
thanks.
Just east of it?
Yes.
That's not in the line. I think that is airport property.
Okay.
Is
So
that
anyway,
right, Danny?
We can look at that.
It
But
was
we
my
know that the
understanding
airport
that
has
we were
some property
including
east of it,
all of
yes.
these kinds of properties.
We were talking about rezoning that a few months ago. We didn't do it because of the transition. The airport decided they recommended that we don't do it, and that was this property that you're talking about.
Thanks, James.
Okay. So
Process, please.
the issue we have before us dates back all the way to July of 2016 when the board first adopted what would have been the survey area, which is the action you take to essentially just start the process of considering a project area. And the reason that's significant is because that essentially draws the boundary by which you create a project area. And the short and easy version of that is when you get to the point where you're actually creating the boundaries of the project area, you can do anything within that boundary description but you cannot go outside of it. You cannot make it larger without essentially starting the process all over again. And so what you have before you is a CRA plan that reflects that original boundary description, and these properties, for whatever reason, were not included within that original boundary. So as it relates to the two properties, if we wanted to adjust the project area boundary to include them, you would essentially need to start that process over again. You would need to have a public hearing to consider amending the project area boundary to include them, and then it would be the decision of this board of whether they wanted to do that. Now, you can do that after the fact. That is a process by which, under state statute, that you can have an existing project area and come back at any time and amend it to incorporate new properties. And all you need to do is essentially take action to do that and ask for that as part of the RDA board.
So Danny, just to confirm, we can't adjust the boundary here right now?
No, not with the plan as proposed and the legal description in front of you today, because the original survey area did not include those areas. And so you are bound by that survey area, and to change that, you would have to start the process over again and essentially just, and when I say process over again, that really is just starting a new public hearing to designate a project area boundary that incorporates that. It's
So
not that you have to.
It was our understanding, and Katie can clarify me if I'm incorrect, but there was the original survey boundary that was adopted by this body in July of 2016, and it's our understanding that that's the survey area from which we can move forward with designating the project area. So we actually shrunk it, and the current plan that you're considering does not include the landfill, because there was a deliberative step on the administration's part to look at the landfill separately, just because there's ongoing stakeholder discussions around the landfill. So we did shrink the boundaries to not include the landfill, but it's our understanding we couldn't expand them without a new board motion. Is that correct?
Right, and I think the trigger point would have been the 30-day noticing that started ironically on December 8th. I think had the board noticed before December 8th that the boundary should be changed, I think it could have been incorporated into the CRA plan that was put out for public review on December 8th. Yeah. I think that public review generated this comment, so in a way it's serving its purpose, the public comment. I think the challenge is the time frame that the city is under in terms of moving this piece forward in general, the plan forward in general.
Board Member Fowler?
Okay, so just to clarify, we could potentially adopt this CRA today and come back in a year or 6 months or next month and expand it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so if
And
it
so
is
the
the
process-
desire, if it's the desire of this board, you can take action on everything you have in front of you this evening and not lose any options. And then you can direct staff to come back and look not only at these properties, but whether there are other properties that maybe we want to include. We can obviously reach out to the airport and see what properties fall within their jurisdiction or issues. And then we can come back and make a recommendation to the board as staff of what an adjustment to that boundary line could be.
Board Member Mendenhall?
But we do not have to conduct a new public benefit analysis on this property or potentially the airport property because it's within this undeveloped area contiguous with the area under consideration, unlike south of I-80, which gets into a lot of different pre-existing conditions and environmental conditions and development and infrastructure that would require a new public benefit analysis.
Correct. Although I would say we'd probably likely just amend that public benefits analysis regardless, just to be safe and include it. But that should not necessarily add any significant time to the process by which we can bring it back to this board.
So what is a realistic timeline if we wanted to initiate an amendment today?
So a realistic timeline would be that probably at one of your next RDA meetings, you would want to set the date for a public hearing. That would initially start that 30-day timer for receiving comment. We would essentially amend the CRA plan boundary and make that available for public viewing within that 30 days. And so I would think that you could get back here in terms of the dates of the next RDA meetings. You're probably looking at March that we could be back for action.
For action, okay. Board Member Fowler, please.
Yes, and this is probably just because I'm new to all of this, but again, going back and sort of putting this in layman's terms for my benefit, if we were to adopt this today, really what adopting the CRA does is allow you to start talking to the taxing entities.
Correct.
And it doesn't limit any options as far as properties included or not included or how we're going to look at it. It simply is this sort of foundational plan that you need in order to get moving forward on talking with taxing entities and how we're going to look at that area. Is that accurate?
The adoption of the plan allows us exactly to enter into the interlocal agreements with the different entities, and it also allows us to continue to work with the developers in terms of their due diligence of looking to develop the property. And then as part of any process we run concurrently with that in terms of amending the plan, we would likely be refining all the information throughout this process over here regardless, and we could easily incorporate any changes as we continue down that path and catch up.
Jennifer Bruno?
Just from a procedural standpoint, at this point, it's simpler for the RDA board to amend the boundary than it would be, say, a year or two from now when you might have 2 or 3 other taxing entities that you would also have to get to agree to amend the boundary. So right now, the only other taxing entity that's sort of on the table is Salt Lake City, which you have a say in. So it's a simpler process than, say, if this was raised 5 years from now and someone wants to amend the boundary, and then it requires going back to all the taxing entities for that kind of an amendment. So.
Yeah, we would likely catch up in terms of amending the boundary, catch up to where we're at with the other taxing entities in time that as part of their approval, they would have the newer project area boundary.
Board members, any further questions? Okay. Would you like to add anything? I think I've talked enough. Okay, in that case, I would look for a motion on what we've got in front of us. And then before moving on, I would propose a straw poll to just gauge interest on whether or not we should recommend that our staff move forward with an amendment process. So I will look for a motion.
The motion sheet for this item is in your electronic packets. Apologies, it doesn't seem to have made it into the print, at least not in my printed folder. But so it's the first paperwork in your electronic packets. There's 3 motions.
Sorry, it's not in mine.
Yeah, it's not in mine.
Not on your electronic one?
No, I don't see it there.
What's the motion? I thought we were doing that in the formal.
There's a motion to approve. Maybe Ben, how about, since we don't have time, will you put it on the screen?
Sure.
Thank you. For some reason, I'm able to access it from the public website. That's what I'm accessing it from, is the public website. I don't know.
Website, you can get it.
Okay.
So the public website has it, but we don't have it on ours.
It's the other. I'm sorry. No, it's neither one of those.
All right.
Sorry.
Well,
Fail.
essentially, we're adopting then, or we are.
It's a motion to approve 2 resolutions.
Okay. We'll wait for it to get up.
I'm gonna back up really quick because I just realized that we didn't have an opportunity to discuss the RAC recommendations. So if you have your staff report in front of you,
Yes.
the Redevelopment Advisory Committee made a few recommendations that I think we should at least acknowledge in this meeting. The first is the minimum 10% statutory housing allocation. If we want to put any strings on that or discuss how we prioritize those funds. And then
The
transportation, access, circulation, and modes to serve the significant growth in this new and future employment base. We did acknowledge this in our transit master plan, so it may be worthwhile to incorporate some language in this CRA plan as we move forward. So does anybody have anything to discuss on that matter?
Just adding it to the motion.
Yeah. And then if you want to talk about housing, how we prioritize the housing money, the 10% set aside.
And their recommendation was workforce.
Of what?
The RAC recommendation, I think, was for workforce housing.
Yeah.
They discussed workforce as well as possibly housing in adjacent neighborhoods or housing
along the transit area.
transit corridors that
Right.
serve the area.
And I'm comfortable moving forward with their suggestions, actually.
Okay, so just the language around their suggestions.
Yeah.
I would like to add infill housing as well, which is sort of related to neighborhood development, but. And then with regard to transit, would you guys feel comfortable moving forward with language structure around their suggestion as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to keep the housing one on.
Open-ended. There's a lot of discussion still to have with that, but I think they left it open, discussing it around transportation or, other ideas.
We still are unclear ourselves about exactly what we're doing sometimes with it.
Right.
So
Okay, great. All right, it looks like we've got a motion on the board, so I will look to my colleagues for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move the board approve a resolution adopting the Northwest Quadrant Community Reinvestment Area.
Rogers. Yes. Fowler?
Yes.
I'm a yes.
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 That motion carries unanimous with Charlie Luke abstaining from, or absent, I should say, from this vote. So thank you very much for all the work that you've done, and we look forward to having a similar discussion with you in the council meeting.
We'll be ready.
All right, moving on, we are now at item C4, a resolution to discuss and consider approval of the terms to facilitate redevelopment of the Capitol Motel.
And
Look-
that motion is in your folder, so sorry about that.
And for those tuning in at home, that is located at 1729, between 1729 and 1767 South State Street and 120 East Wilson Avenue. And at the table, we have Danny Waltz again and Tammy Hunsaker. Thank you for staying with us, as well as Ben Ludkiff from the council office. Why don't you guys go ahead and set it up for us and take it away?
Sure. So this is a follow-up discussion to the December 12th meeting where the
We know how to clear.
Why don't we wait for 1 second? All right. 1, 2. We have board members in motion, so let's wait for a few
we're good.
moments. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Tammy, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
You're welcome.
So as I was saying, this is a follow-up to the December 12th meeting in which the board voted to earmark funding for this project pending an RDA loan application and review process. Since that meeting, we have carried out an application and review process. So as a reminder, the applicant is Housing Assistance Management Enterprise, Hame for short, and they are an entity of the Housing Authority of Salt Lake City. The request is $3.2 million, essentially for acquisition for the Capitol Motel property assemblage. So as a reminder, there are 4 parcels actually under contract by under three different purchase contracts. So a little discussion on the project concept. The Housing Authority, or Hame, is looking at implementing a project with 108 units. 33% of these units would be market rate, and the balance would be affordable. They're looking at commercial space on the ground floor. However, one caveat, in the beginning, this commercial space, although it will be designed to be commercial space, might function more as community space that could then switch over in hopefully the near immediate future to be commercial spaces as State Street redevelops and we get more foot traffic along there to support the commercial. The Housing Authority and Hame, they're proposing an interim use to actually utilize the hotel as transitional housing for extremely low-income populations during this time. And I know Dan Ackerman, the Executive Director of the Housing Authority, is prepared to speak on this more, but the idea is that it could provide an interim use in the short term before the property is redeveloped, provide vital housing opportunities, but also it'll provide a use that's well managed while this property is set for redevelopment, instead of leaving a vacant and blighted parcel that could attract crime and people breaking in and other unsavory uses. So we think it could be a good solution as long as that's well managed. The Housing Authority plans on moving forward and applying for low-income housing tax credits, 9%, for the majority of their funding. That's a competitive application process, so they do have some backup ideas for funding if that is not awarded. And we really, in structuring these loan terms, we wanted to build the loan terms to meet RDA program policy as closely as we could. So we actually are proposing to structure it in a two-phased process. The first phase would provide funding in the amount of $2.7 million, which is 90% of the loan to appraised value, which follows RDA loan policy. We felt a little hesitant with providing the full $3.2 million just because we wouldn't meet our loan to value policy. So we're proposing 2.7 upfront with an additional 50 to cover the applicant's hard costs that they've already expended. So the first phase would essentially be 2.75 million, and these loan terms would be structured very close. Well, they do follow RDA loan policy, so we'd be looking at up to 24 months for the loan term, an amortization period of 30 years, 2.87% interest rate. The applicant would be paying principal and interest on a monthly basis, which would equal about $11,400. So that provides them incentive to get the project designed and financed and under construction as soon as possible. The second phase would then provide up to, the balance of phase one would be rolled into the second phase as well. And then an additional amount up to $3.2 million to cover the whole cost that you've earmarked, or the whole funding amount you've earmarked. And then that would roll into a longer term permanent financing structure with a 1% interest rate and deferred payments unless there's sufficient cash flow. So essentially it would be a cash flow loan.
And then the forgiveness after 20 years.
Right, and that would still be subject to coming back to the board, but if there is still a balance after the 20-year term, we put in here that the applicant could come back for loan forgiveness if there's certain affordability requirements that are insured after the 20 years. Also, an important part that I failed to mention is that for phase one to roll into phase two, there are certain contingencies that the applicant needs to meet. They need to successfully obtain sufficient sources of permanent financing, demonstrate a financing gap, successfully complete the RDA design review process, and implement a development concept that would include a mixed income project with no less than 1/3 of the total residential units provided at market rate and no less than 1/3 at affordable. So even though right now they're proposing 30% market rate, 67% affordable, as the project moves forward and they get their financing in place, the parameters of the term would have the 1/3 minimum. Ground floor commercial space or flex space is a requirement of the phase two. And then in our loan terms, we have that the phase two approval could be provided by the RDA Finance Committee unless the RDA board would like this project to come back to this body for the final approval of phase two.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions? Rogers, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question, and that is in regards to the commercial sign, the off-premise sign that's on the northern part of the property. I guess my question is, we've seen this happen before where it'll impede, us from developing the property. I know in the report it says that the landowner feels comfortable with it, but Salt Lake City's pretty good at beating commercial signs. So if they have that opportunity, our RDA staff, our attorney's office is really good at that. I think that any help that they could give the property owner in moving forward with this would be helpful.
Okay.
Great.
And I think Dan could be in a position to give an update on that when he comes up as well. So.
Okay. Any other questions at the moment? Okay. Board Member Mendenhall, please.
Actually, they might be better for Housing Authority.
Sure. Mr. Nackerman, can you come up and introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Dan Nackerman. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority. I'm also the President of Hame, which has been in business something like 23 years. And I do have our Director of Homeless Services, our Director of Real Estate Development, our Finance CFO, and many others here in case more detailed questions come up.
Would you also articulate the relationship between Housing Authority of Salt Lake and Hame?
Yes, Hame and HDC are two 501c3 nonprofits that are really that are instrumentalities of the Housing Authority. So they're not completely arm's length, but they do operate fairly independently from the Housing Authority, can't utilize HUD funding directly. In fact, we're even adding a couple board members that are not on the Housing Authority board just to make sure they're arm's length.
Great. Board Member Mendenhall.
Thank you. Dan, thanks for coming up. Of course, I'm excited about this project. The entire community is excited about this project. We hope it's the first of 4 or 5 similar projects along State Street, just saying. The one on the current use, there's a single-family home, and I was wondering about whether or not it's currently occupied or not.
There's actually, between all of the parcels, there's actually 2 single-family homes, and they're kind of quasi-occupied by some of the business owners that are involved. There's a tattoo parlor, a shoe shop, and the motel. If you're alluding to relocation, we do know how to handle that very sensitively, and I've had years of relocation experience with very large projects at 5 other housing authorities.
I would like, if there's the opportunity for this board to be appraised of those activities as the project progresses. I too had questions like Board Member Rogers about your confidence in the resolution of the existing commercial sign, but I like the way you said it better, so I'm just gonna second that. And then my question was about if you could talk to us about your staffing plan, your support plan for the interim use there, and then when we get to the part of having 25% AMI and in that range, we've talked consistently about making sure that there are supportive services tied to that level of AMI. And can you tell us your plans in the permanent realm?
Sure. Beginning with the interim use, we have kind of a 2-pronged approach right now. One is sort of a single room occupancy or SRO type of use that have been all over the country since the 1930s, starting in New York and in a lot of West Coast cities. That'd be an apartment complex with common facilities, and by the way, probably management and common use in the single-family homes that you just referred to. It would be very low rents with very low barrier screening, possible rapid rehousing as part of the program, and we're even gearing up to apply for some funding for kind of a different approach, which would be to house Tanf families. That automatically means they would be very small families, usually a single parent that's homeless with 1 child, but that's a successful model as well in other communities. The second option, in fact, I just filled out the paperwork yesterday to be a motel operator, something I never thought I'd do in my career.
Me either, Dan.
Yes. Yeah, we may even contract with Danny on the overnighter.
Just adding to your resume, guys. Come on.
For better or worse.
But that would be to maintain motel status with really shorter-term rentals, not a homeless shelter. I just want to say that over and over again, but likely geared towards either previous homeless families or individuals or those in the last stages of eviction or rapid rehousing. Again, the adjacent homes would be for like 24-hour on-site management in one case, and the other home would probably common facilities or maybe a common kitchen.
Dan?
Those startup costs are extensive for relocation for kind of facelifts, but that's the interim use plan.
On that note, I have a question as well. This is probably already used for housing for either rapid rehousing or Tanf families or individuals who have recently experienced homelessness. So will any of the existing clients using the motel be transitioned into this new program?
We would handle the existing clients on a case-by-case basis. If they're true motel users, and there are some, especially nightly and weekly cash basis, there probably wouldn't be as much of a plan for protection. But as an example, there's a maintenance guy who's rented there for almost 2 years, and we would work carefully with people like that have either rented month to month instead of night to night, or an extensive length of time.
Dan?
And the second thing is there is a real shortage of motel rooms, especially since the relocation from Rio Grande, of families, and those are in short supply right now. There's motel and hotel owners that are no longer wanting to participate because, as somebody alluded to, sometimes the services don't come with that. Oh, sorry.
Can I ask you to dig a little deeper on the staffing piece of that? Because as our chair was saying, there's probably some overlap in the populations that are there today versus who might be there when you're into the interim use phase. And I guess it boils down to, tell us how your staffing and oversight is going to make the environment in and around the Capitol Motel different under your authority than it is today.
Well, I'm not going to mislead you to say we have it all perfectly planned, but I will brag about how well we do it at other sites. We have a 100-unit site, Sunrise, that Zach Payou is the director of, who's here. We have several hundred other units that are permanent supportive housing, usually homeless veterans. We have staff that includes LCSWs, MSWs. We have connections to service providers that are in the medical fields. So we feel we're kind of like a little company that has, financial staff, HR staff, but we also have a very extensive staff assisting with homeless property management. 72-unit site on the VA campus that we manage and provide services for. A 12-unit site not far from the campus. So I think, again, it'll be, once we decide on precisely the interim use program, we feel like we'll be able to really manage that so much better than it is now, and frankly make the neighbors and the ballpark community much happier. On your other question on the longer term, when we get down into, after the new construction, when we get down into the 25%, we've added fairly high expense levels to our internal pro formas, which many developers don't do. Most developers plug those in at like 4,000 per unit. Ours are in the 5,000 per unit range, knowing that if somebody's in the 20, 25, 30% range, there may be services. But again, kind of a case by case. Some people need off-site services, some people don't need any at all. But our income ranges are, they average, by the way, in our pro formas right now, and we're flexible and willing to take policy direction. We've been trying to keep up with it and adjust to it. But really quite proud to say that our low-income portion of the units, which are about 74 out of 108, average about 41% AMI. That's the average. So we kind of carried, this was spawned from the Blue Ribbon Committee. We've tried to carry part of that mission, even though it won't be done in time for the Rio Grande. The 34 units that are market rate still hover around 80% of AMI, just because that's about where market rate is on State Street and 17th in 2018. long answer.
I'll just thank Dan and for my closing, for showing up to the Ballpark Community Council as often as you have. And I trust that that's the kind of ongoing relationship that your organization will have with that community. You've been very responsive to their input and feedback, and I hope that's a continuing relationship that we'll see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board Member Johnston.
Yeah, thanks again. A couple of design questions. You have, at least in the renderings I've seen so far, the initial ones, 4 2-bedroom units and the rest are 1-bedroom. Is that accurate, or studio?
The unit mix as we're proposing it now on our pro formas are 8 2-bedroom units and 100 1-bedroom units. Out of those 100 1-bedroom units, 60 are modest in size and 40 are micro units, very small units.
And so when you talked about the Tanf families, you're talking about 8 of these units that might be applicable to that. Is there any thought about making flexible kind of units where you could expand 2 units together to make a larger unit, or retain the same size, or flexibility in the type of families you bring in or people? Any thoughts on that?
The Tanf approach would be the interim approach with the existing motel.
Mhm.
The existing motel does have some 2 bedrooms, interestingly. I haven't seen that before. I guess we could call them suites. There's 39 existing motel rooms. But that idea for the permanent is an excellent idea, that if these units are too small, or if we want to be more family friendly, we could have some with kind of a flex joining possibility. So we'll really look hard into that. Unfortunately, on the TANF, some people, a homeless single parent is often ready, willing, and able to live in a very small unit with their child.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not suggesting the right ratio. I do know that we tend to see a lot of 1-bedroom units in the city, which it's great for cost benefit, right? I mean, you can build a lot more for that and a lot more rent, but it also limits who can live here anymore. And so, not that it's your responsibility to take that on yourself, but
Sure.
if you're being creative and looking at this in the design phase, it'd be interesting to look at. The second piece, question for you is...
Sorry, just one more, a reminder that we will be going through the RDA design review process.
Mhm.
So that's one of the conditions that we're glad to do.
The only second question I had is, this is initial rendering, I understand that, but why put parking on the State Street side of the building at this point in the thought process? Or?
Yeah, we'll have some variance issues. We're parking, the way the commercial corridor is set up, it requires fairly big setbacks from the street. And we are convinced, based on our Ninth East project as an example, that we don't need much parking, especially on a corridor like that. Ninth East had no parking requirements, and people were quite negative that we put almost no parking in there. I believe it's 68 units, and it leased very fast, and people they would prefer parking spaces, but we think technically there would be something like 48 spaces, I believe, required. We're planning internally with about 23 spaces, but we have a long ways to go on those issues. So I think our goal would be to not have a huge setback from the street, to make it kind of an urban core design, and to also not have very much parking.
Thank you.
Board Member Wharton.
Yes. Any idea, or have you put any thought about what you're going to do with the historic neon sign?
We thought about, we renamed this so far for tax credit purposes as Capital Homes, just to keep the word capital in there. We actually thought about modifying, I know I'm a preservationist as well, but we actually thought about modifying that sign from Capital Motel to Capital Homes. And we're developing kind of a logo of a Capitol building that fits the visuals of that site over the years.
That is cool. I'm just glad you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Board Member Wharton, last year I went out on a tour of a number of housing authority projects with Dan and a few members from his team, and we went by the Overnighter Motel on North Temple, and they have a really cool sign as well. And he signaled to me, Dan signaled to me at that time that they would explore incorporating that sign as well.
Yeah, I love that idea. Thank you.
But not onto the capital side.
Any further questions for Mr. Neckerman? Go ahead, Danny.
I just wanted to add that this did go to the RDA Finance Committee on December 21st, and they recommended approval of the terms without any additional considerations or contingencies. Within your packet, there's a supplemental memo on that, and I just wanted to point out that one of the reasons they really chose to do this loan was because of the track record of the Housing Authority and the partnership that they have with Salt Lake City. They also wanted to focus on the neighborhood in terms of the location on State Street, as well as in what could be a potential RDA project area. And then they also looked very favorably on the way that the loan was structured in terms of the acquisition loan rolling over into a permanent and construction loan with the ability of that going back to the Finance Committee and the board, if the board chooses, with the contingencies and the requirements that they would have to meet. So overall, they felt very comfortable. They were very supportive. We were happy to get that recommendation, and as on behalf of staff, we recommend approval of this loan as well.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
I'd like to make a motion, but I want to just make sure that the simple motion sheet that we have to approve the term sheet is actually doing the loan in the 2 phases that the RDA's recommended. Okay. Then can I make a motion, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
I move the board approve the term sheet for $3.2 million in loans to the Housing Assistance Management Enterprise for an affordable housing project on State Street.
Second.
It has been moved by Board Member Mendenhall and seconded by Board Member Johnston. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you for all your work on this.
And if I could just,
Yes.
I know you hate this kind of stuff, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our really progressive chair, and that's Palmer DePaulis. We've had to take quite a few risks financially to get this far. Also, the Blue Ribbon Committee, which, as I mentioned, did spawn this project. The staff at Hame, the council members in particularly, who now kind of know what we do, and we really welcome the new council members to take a tour. And kind of the overwhelming support in general of the ballpark community on these types of projects. We really are excited that they understand the intricacies. And I especially want to thank Tammy to my far left, who has carried the water on this. Danny a little bit, but most
I spill the water. I spill more water than I carry, so. Thank you, Dan.
Can I just
Please.
invite you to extend that conversation to Liberty Wells, because the Capitol Motel is actually in the Liberty Wells
Yes,
Community Council
yeah.
and not in the ballpark.
yeah,
It's on the east side of the street,
Same president now, I guess. Huh?
but not the same community.
Right, right.
There's a lot of Bill in both of those. But I hope you'll be able to come
Yeah.
over to Liberty Wells.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you and the whole Housing Authority for your ongoing partnership with the city. Thank you for this as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We are now at item C5, report and announcements from the Executive Director. Looks like we have Mayor Biskupski coming to the mic.
Thank you, and thank you for the work you did just a few minutes ago on the Northwest Quadrant. Very helpful to our city, and thank you to this team who's been working so diligently with our legal team on this opportunity we have. And congratulations to the chair and vice chair. I look forward to working with you as we do this difficult work, but important work. And I want you to know that we have reached out to the chair of the council and the vice chair and to you, invitations of opportunities to meet regularly with me or to meet with me whenever necessary. But please know my door is always open, and my phone should be on your speed dial for anything that you feel like you would like to have a discussion about. But I look forward to working with you and to this leadership that we have in front of us. It's exciting time. We have a lot going on and a tremendous amount of opportunity. So I just wanted to say thank you for already the work that's getting done with this team.
Thank you, Mayor Biskupski. And now we move on to report and announcement from RDA staff.
The only item I have is I happen to run into the chairperson for the city council this afternoon, and she strongly encouraged me to welcome our new board members by inviting them to a tour of the Utah Theater and any other properties of the RDA that they would like to do. So in anticipation of that, you can expect to get an invitation from us if you would like to follow through on that. We'd be more than happy to do that. And obviously, as part of that, if there's anything else in particular you'd like to include, we'd be happy to do that as well. So
great.
That is all I have.
Thank you very much, Danny. Report from the chair and vice chair. I don't have anything except to say thank you for your support and confidence in both myself and Amy for the next year. I guess, is my position a 2-year position? Okay, so 2 years for me and at least 1 for Amy, maybe more. I'm really, really looking forward to the work that we have in front of us on the redevelopment agency, so I appreciate your confidence. Anything from you, Amy?
I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to working with the RDA and to working with Derek and learning a lot, because I already have. So thank you all.
All right, we are now at section D of the written briefings. Do any board members have any feedback or thoughts to offer on these 2 written briefings? Nothing? Okay. So the first one is the economic development strategy for the Northwest Quadrant project area, and the second is the potential exploratory trips to inform the proposed State Street project area. This has popped up a couple times over the last year and a half or so, and I would like to note on that the field trip written briefing. There were 3 potential field trips highlighted: Colfax Avenue in Colorado, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Austin, Texas. I would really defer to RDA staff on which one is the best, but a number of board members are going to Minneapolis with the Downtown Alliance. I think there's 4 of us in total, and so, or 6? As of yesterday, we saw 4, but maybe there's more going. At any rate, a good number of board members will be visiting Minneapolis, and so I guess I would make a request to Danny and Suze on this. If you would at least consider reaching out to Jason and Jesse with the Downtown Alliance, and I've been on these urban exploration trips before with the Downtown Alliance, and oftentimes the way they structure them is they have little breakout sessions where you can choose which one you'd go to. And so maybe there's an opportunity to do a little bit of programming with the RDA, and we can do some exploration of similar state streets in Minneapolis, and then we have an easier decision in front of us, which is to choose between number 1 and number 3 here. So just a suggestion if you're willing to take that. Okay.
We will do that and follow up. Thank you.
Section E, the consent, we have none, and that looks like it concludes the work today for the RDA work session. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. Madam Chair, when would you like to start the City Council work session? We haven't taken a break yet, so.
Now, would it be too much if I asked us to be back at 4? Just over 10 minutes?
That's great.
Okay, let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you.